Welcome to the Bladtcast. Come in and know us better, man. Welcome to a very special Muppet-tastic Muppet Christmas. We are going to talk about Muppet Christmas Carol and so much more. As always, I am Christian Bladt, making a triumphant return. You may not even realize you were on the Bladtcast a few weeks ago. Katie Hampton, Katie El Sassy Pants, our Guardians of the Galaxy special was cross-purposed for both podcasts. So welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back.
And Matt Kelly, I was realizing this is, I think the only other show you and I have done was Weird Algorithm, right?
Yeah. You did an episode of Weird Algorithm on Nature Trail to Hell, which is still in the top 3 originals for both me and my co-host Matt's originals list right now.
Yeah, I mean it's probably for now and forever. It might be number 2 to One More Minute, but I do still love it, you know.
Yeah,
it's
a classic.
And yeah, so I know Matt and Katie through the Geekscape Network, and there's so many shows over there where you can just find them. But Matt, you specifically have shows that I know that you host. You mentioned Weird Algorithm. I feel like that's going to speak to the inside, the soul of so many members of Bladtcast Nation, as we call them. So take a quick moment and explain that show, and I'll ask you about one other one before we dive into the Muppets.
All right, so Weird Algorithm is a show I started with Milligan of the rock band Wheatus, and we are going through Weird Al's entire everything in as close to a chronological order as possible. So literally next week, Katie is our guest, talking about Al TV episode 3. And then we're going to have one of Al's close personal friends, UH Jeff, is going to be joining us to talk about the complete Al promotional VHS tape that went out in the late 80s to promote the Dare to Be Stupid album before we kick off the new year with Polka Party. So we're less than 40 episodes deep. It's a great time to get caught up because we've got a ton of really cool guests coming up. We've recorded all of Polka Party. We're getting ready to start working on Even Worse. I did get word the other day that a particular female comedian who may have been part of After Midnight and may have had the punk rock band Nerve Herder write a song specifically about her will be joining us to talk about one of her favorite Weird Al songs in the very near future. So the amount of weird guests that we've been able to get for their mutual love of this goofy man. I'm still working on getting Katie's fiance on for a future Al TV as well. We've got a lot of fun stuff just around the horizon for Weird Algorithm.
Mark,
right.
who,
Well,
was actually in a music video with Weird Al.
Yes.
Who was your fiance?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Which video?
It actually wasn't a Weird Al song. Weird Al was in it, but it was like it was a Star Trek song, and he played Kirk, and Weird Al like came in for like a musical thing.
I mean, that already sounds amazing. Well, yeah, and we'll make sure that we get all the plugs out. Katie, I know people can find you on Twitch is one of the best ways to find you. Are you also El Sassy Pants there, or is that where the Z comes into play?
No, Z comes into play only on TikTok, but yeah,
Gotcha.
I know you can find me most places at El Sassy Pants. You can occasionally find me on Twitch, more Twitter and Instagram, doing random stuff most of the time when I have the time and not focusing on my knee.
And, hey, and the host of a very emotionally beautiful podcast, tentatively called the Black and White Podcast, but I think name changing in 2023.
It is going to be changing in 2023. We were going to try and change it to Don't Worry, Nobody's Listening, but apparently that might be a common name as well. But yeah, if you just look for Geekscape Black and White Podcast, you will find a great podcast that I have with my good friend Marie. And we started right after we were laid off of our mutual job. And we talk about the trials and tribulations, and we talk about how life might not be black and white, but we are. So...
Well, great. Well, what we're here to talk about today is, of course, primarily Muppet Christmas Carol. And Katie's seen this before the last show we did, but Matt, feast your eyes on this beautiful VHS of Muppet Christmas Carol, which, of course, is the complete film as Brian Henson intended it to be viewed.
Yes.
And I think that's a great starting point. I did not see this film when it was released theatrically. I
Oh, I
found
did.
it on home video maybe a year or two after. I was like 16 when it came out, and I was like, I don't need to see that Muppets. And then I remembered, I'm like, oh my god, I love the Muppets. What was I thinking? But I do remember watching it with my sister, and I had the privilege this weekend of watching it with my kids for the first time. So my son Felix is 7, and my daughter Lucy is 5, and as you might expect, they loved the rats. Rizzo in
Yes.
particular.
Yep.
My daughter Lucy just loved him talking about his jelly beans. And it's always like, you always know, like, oh yeah, this is the stuff that the kids are going to really like. When I watched earlier this year, I watched Star Wars with my son for the first time, and he loved R2D2 and C3PO in a way where I kind of forgot that, like, oh yeah, they're so good. And like kids can kind of relate to that. And I think that the surprising thing was my 5-year-old daughter was like talking about a lot of story points. It's like, oh no, is Belle gonna die? Like when he's in the Christmas present, sorry, Christmas past, and like she's seen enough movies and enough TV where it's like,
She's known
and
this
then
is structure.
as it starts to pick up, she's like, is he going to marry Belle? And I'm like, oh boy, that would be a good ending, wouldn't it? And I'm like, Dickens doesn't tidy things up that neatly. So,
Nope.
and just a lot of questions about that. And it's a good thing we watched. For people that maybe don't know, on Disney Plus, you can watch the complete film now. However, you do have to select it under extras.
I do not. This makes me. Someone sent me a link to that literally today with the instructions on how to watch it, and I was
Yeah.
so angry because I was like, "Just make it the movie."
Yeah,
Right.
because it is. It's just
Like-
the full length movie. If you
Like,
want
why do you have
that
to
scene
go
not
through
in.
like a secret
Right.
passageway to see?
Yeah, and I'm just
movie?
wondering, is it because the other version, the theatrical version is what was already there? Is it easier to leave it there for whatever reason? I feel like it's not. But my point in bringing it up at this moment is that my daughter seeing that movie for the first time that way, she noticed the reprise at the end. It's like, oh, that's the song that Belle was singing to him. I'm like, yes. And
Yeah.
I'm like, if you didn't watch it this way, you wouldn't know that. And Matt, Katie knows this because I mentioned it to her a couple weeks ago. My wife hates that song. The Love Is Gone.
Look, I can understand. So here's the thing. There has been this long history with Disney releases where, or even before Disney, some of the most iconic, beautiful, sad songs have almost not made it into a movie. Somewhere Over the Rainbow almost didn't make it into Wizard of Oz for being too slow and boring. Katzman desperately wanted to cut Part of Your World out of Little Mermaid because he thought that none of the kids would connect to it. And like, that's pretty much what happened after the theatric release with Love Is Gone. And I saw it in theaters, and I'm not going to sit here and be like, yep, even at 6, I was like, this is pretty boring, or like, oh, this is really insightful. I can't wait for this to be dove into deeper. But it was, as a kid, I do think that I remembered it being a lull. And I remember watching the VHS tape and being like, okay, we're moving. We're getting to the next scary Muppet. Like, this is great. Now, as an adult, I'm like, you've cut the entire emotional everything, just ripped it straight out of the film.
The story doesn't make sense. They start crying for really no reason. What were you going to say, Katie?
I was just going to say, I remember seeing it as a kid, and I did think it was a little bit slow, but I also connected with it because it was around the time that my parents were starting to get a divorce. And that song touched me in a way that I never thought like was possible for a kid to comprehend, where I was just like, oh, it's sad, but it's simple. Like, the love is gone. Like, it's literally called The Love Is Gone.
but it is deeper than that to me, because in watching it as an adult, the thing that strikes me the most, right? And I think all three of us are musical theater fans, so we know that like nothing happens by accident, right? It's when Michael Caine starts singing along with Belle, like someone could write that off as, okay, this is just part of the musical, and they went, no, that is showing that it's been 50 years and he still remembers verbatim this goodbye. This has her words have
Katie,
sat
it's so funny you said that, because I just felt, I was like, what's that in my legs? I'm like, oh yeah, chills. I forgot I can feel emotions too. Yeah. And I mean, Matt, that's so well put, that's really what it is. And Yeah, because look, I think a lot of people have moments like that, whether they're relationship moments, just awful things that you remember from life. It could be as simple as the one time the one kid on the playground said the one thing that was spot on, and you're like, oh yeah, I still carry that with me. But it's like, yeah, sometimes they still hurt, yeah, even that much later. And my son wasn't bored during that song, but he definitely was glad when we got back to Rizzo.
Yeah.
But I think my and my daughter watches what you would consider boys shows and girl shows, lots of everything, so I think that it still was the fact that she really responded to that song at 5, and because boy, she kept talking about Belle and wanted to know when Belle was going to be back, and I'm like, the answer is never.
And
I'm
what
sure.
a beautiful thing, like that your daughter thought she was going to die when
Yeah.
I mean it was a death of a relationship, and it was that serious, and that is kind of a hard thing to comprehend for a kid, but that grief is still there, and I thought
Yeah.
that was so beautifully done. So she got it,
Yeah, no, I know. And that I was just like, look, I was excited to do the show anyway, but actually sitting there and watching it with them, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe. And my wife has been so busy. My wife's a TV writer. I haven't even had this conversation with her yet because she's been swamped,
Oh no.
and I'm just like, that song you hate. She also hates There's Always Tomorrow in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Well, I also agree with her on that.
But it's for the
But
same reason. I agree that that's not as good a song, but it's the same reason. It's like, what are you doing slowing everything down for?
Yeah, I mean, controversial take. I as a guy who literally has a Christmas podcast, but like I don't have the bandwidth for Rudolph or Charlie Brown Christmas anymore. Like I think that those specials are these iconic specials, right? And that's why we watch them. I said on my podcast one time that I have a Stockholm syndrome with the Charlie Brown Christmas, where I don't like it, but I feel obligated to watch it every single December, regardless.
I do get that, yeah.
But like,
yeah, for years, once a year, Patty Hearst would go hide in a closet for a couple days.
Yeah,
it's just what happens.
Exactly. No, but like with those
I
specials,
thought for a second about whether or not I was going to say that, and I'm like, I can say that.
I'm glad you did. No, but like with those specials, I think what's missing with both of those is like I don't feel any emotion but nostalgia with those at this point. Like Charlie Brown gets real weird and Jesus-y in the last like 5 minutes, and like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer like is not a depiction of it's if I was Santa, I would sue for how poorly I was depicted.
Oh no, I would take every copy of that special like George Lucas did with the Star Wars holiday special.
I'd be like, you're making me look like a jerk here.
Yeah,
But
it's like no, just let people see the Mickey Rooney version of me.
But there,
yeah,
but there are, and I'm sure we'll dive into this. There are 10 Muppets Christmas properties in existence.
Honestly, and I'll tell you right now, we're not going to get to all of them because we won't have the time. We're going to talk about a couple of favorites, but this could also become an annual holiday tradition. I assume that this is Mark in the chat who says, wonderful observation, Matt.
Thank you.
Because he wanted a shout out earlier in the chat because we were talking about him being in a music video, and he's like, hey, that someone has a name. And he also saw it in the theaters. Yeah, look, in 1992, I was officially too cool for school. Let's talk a little bit about the sort of the timing of this, which I think people that are in deep in the Muppet lore would know it like we do. But this movie comes out in 1992, just a few years after Jim Henson passes away. This is the first thing to come out. I mean, essentially, it's the first thing to come out because there's that. I assume you've seen the Muppets Remember Jim Henson.
Muppets Celebrate Jim Henson.
That's it. That
is an emotional watch that I can't get through without crying.
Yeah.
I also sometimes I just want to cry, and I'll put that on, or I'll also
that is a great way to do it.
On YouTube, you can also watch the entire Jim Henson memorial service that someone uploaded, and that will also force you to cry for 2 straight hours.
And by the way, apparently this is your buddy Ryan from Montreal. I was very confused as to who that was in the chat. Okay.
Oh, that's Ryan Stick. That's Ryan Stick of the Ryan Stick Show.
So that was really the first thing without Jim, and then this is directed by Brian Henson, and it's funny because this is really most people's first interaction with what we have to call new Kermit, the Steve Whitmer Kermit. And I remember when I first saw that Kermit, it took some getting used to. And we've got the Kermit now, and you're like, oh man, do I miss Steve Whitmire.
Yeah.
That's the,
And
I almost feel like it's like the cast of SNL where you're just like, you have your cast that like is
Yeah.
very nostalgic for you. And then you have your cast that you're like, I give it a pass because it's still, there's a bit of nostalgia in that and they still did a great job. And then there's like the future generations when you're just like, it's just not my Kermit.
But I
Yeah.
would say that's across the board, because we're down to what, two original Muppeteers, and I don't really think Frank Oz is taking any breaks from his directing gigs to like jump in and do Fozzie and Piggy anymore. So we really just got Dave, and I think Dave may have retired in the last year or two as well. But
and let's just say, by the way, I mean, there's a lot of great Muppet performers who do it currently. I know Bill Barretta's brother really well, and I've met Bill a couple times, and the passion he has for those characters, and I mean, he had the shoes to fill of taking over a number of Jim's roles, not Kermit, but Rolf and Swedish Fish. He also created Pepe the King Prawn, so I can talk to him for hours. He's a great guy, but it's really a simple matter of when they start to not sound similar enough. This is not Muppets proper, but the new Big Bird, it's like I was just like, I think I need my kids to watch old Sesame Street because I can't have new Big Bird on in the house. Well, it's just, but he sounds nothing like Big Bird.
I think SNL was the right comparison though, right? Because I don't think it's necessarily a new cast. Like, if you're a longtime diehard SNL fan, you probably have your favorite Bill Clinton, like, oh, this was my favorite person who did Bill Clinton. Or like we talk about how people say like, oh, every impression of William Shatner is someone doing an impression of Kevin Pollak's William Shatner. You know what I mean? Like there is
right.
This,
and
like,
everyone's Christopher Walken is an impression of Jay Moore's
Christopher Walken.
Even Kevin Pollak's impression.
Even Kevin Pollak's. Yeah. And that kind of leads to this thing where it's like Jim Henson, and we'll dive into this, I'm sure, when we get into some of the older specials, but like the love and absolute care that those 5 original Muppeteers had for every single one of their characters, it's like you can bring in people who love it as much as we love it. I would say that I am in the top 10 biggest Muppet fans in the world, like the top 10% of Muppet fans in the entire world. And I could not for the life of me step into Jim Henson's shoes for the love and appreciation that he clearly had every single time that he was Kermit the Frog. And it is that transformative stage. I think Ryan, who was in the comments, talked about this when he was interviewing a Muppeteer on his podcast, but there's the infamous story of like Jim Henson was on a late night talk show and he was doing Kermit the Frog. And at commercial, they're like, hey, can you project a little more? Whenever you go into Kermit, our mics aren't picking you up. And he's like, okay. And he tried to do it again a little bit louder for the next take. And they were like, still happening. And then that's when he realized that the boom mic operator kept moving the boom mic to Kermit the Frog when Kermit would start talking, because it was he fully put everything into that puppet, and it became a real living, breathing thing to even amazing. Like the behind the scenes boom mic operators. And that's what's sometimes missing, is it's like that. I can still think when I watch any Muppet film from the Jim Henson era that those are real living creatures walking around, that there is not a puppeteer underneath them. And I think post Henson, they really started to break that fourth wall more and more and more.
I still have no idea how they rode the bike in the Muppet movie,
Yeah.
And I love that they didn't want to tell you,
Yeah. That's the kind of the cool thing, especially like, I mean, you see remnants of that, especially when it comes to Mandalorian, when like they made Grogu a Muppet essentially, because it's like that was more connected, like you're actually connecting and looking at that Muppet as opposed to something digital or just like looking at a tennis ball. And I feel like we've lost so much of that practical effect in a lot of different films and movies that the Muppets really brought in so well that even actors visiting the set or like going to Sesame Street or something like that, they're like, you can't help but look at the Muppet. Like,
it's
It's a
I'm
creature.
glad you mentioned Grogu, because the example is, again, it's Frank Oz. You have Puppet Yoda that we all know from the original films, and then they went back to Puppet Yoda, but there was CGI Yoda,
Ugh,
and you just couldn't connect to him the same way. I mean, he was
Yeah.
supposed to be younger, and you needed him to move around and do cool stuff. I get it,
right.
but when they went back to Puppet Yoda, you're like, yes, that's what I need. And I think that look, some of the recent Muppet output I've enjoyed. I like the one that's just called Muppets, the one that Jason
Yeah,
Segel did.
Jason Segel's
Siegel
Muppets
did,
is great.
yeah.
I really like the Muppets Haunted Mansion as well. I thought
Yeah,
that was fun.
I
yeah.
had a
So I don't,
rough time
I'm
with
just
that.
just to interject. I don't want it to seem like I'm just knocking on everything,
No,
but
no, no.
there's a bunch of misses,
Yeah.
and when it
Right.
misses, you're like, oh no, But this was not that. Muppet Christmas Carol, I think the main reason it works, and I always say this, is because for me personally, the best Ebenezer Scrooge I've ever seen on screen is Michael Caine in this movie, because it's not like, oh, I'm going to play this differently because I'm in a Muppet movie. No, you have to play it the same way, and he got that right away.
Yeah.
And Matt's point earlier about seeing him start to realize, like, oh man, I have been a dick, and just the gradual way he does it, and and he's pleading with the spirits that he needs more time and all that. And I've seen some very good Mr. Scrooges, but he's so good. And then it's like when you surround him with the cast, I mean, the most interesting thing is really this idea of Gonzo as Charles Dickens, because
I know.
he's not our number one Muppet for the most part. The thinking
He
is
was
that,
after that. Like for me,
oh yeah,
Gonzo.
after that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. He totally raised in like my like category of like who were my top Muppets, because obviously like Big Bird and Kermit were my tops, and then that movie came out, and I was like, "Who is this Gonzo?" Like I feel like I didn't even know
Oh,
who Gonzo was at
see, I've
that.
been a Gonzo fanboy since I was a kid watching the Muppet Show. But so years ago, you'd have to do so much digging because this was at least 15 years ago. I wrote an article called like "What Does Your Favorite Muppet Say About You" for the Geekscape website,
Oh
and
wow.
my breakdown was that for Gonzo specifically, like Gonzo and Fozzie are two sides of the same coin,
Yeah.
right? They're both performers. They're both people in the entertainment industry, but the difference is like Fozzie is that guy who just wants to be loved, and he wants to go out there and he wants to make people happy, and he might not be the best guy for the job, but gosh darn it, he's going to go out there and do it. Where like especially Muppet Show era Gonzo, he is an artist. He
Mhm.
like his whole thing was like he was like the David Lynch of the Muppets, right? Like he's like, I'm going to walk out there and I'm going to eat an entire tire to the sound of Flight of the Bumblebee, and if you don't appreciate it, it's because you're an idiot and you don't understand my art. Like, and that's the Gonzo that I loved, was that out. I mean, his name, I there's no way his name is not supposed to be a subtle Hunter S. Thompson reference of like just
Oh,
out there
yeah.
wild goofiness. But what I was going to say with all of this is like, I think the biggest problem with most of the Muppets things in the last couple years, and why Jason Segel's Muppets is the exception, is that we keep wanting to modernize the Muppets, and we shouldn't. Like the Muppets should always be this trapped in this weird vaudeville stage show era where like Muppet Movie, Great Muppet Caper, Muppets Take Manhattan, and then even this and Muppets Treasure Island, they are
Yes.
playing characters of them. They are playing characters, or they're playing characters of themselves. Like the Muppet Movie is them playing themselves in a movie version of their story. It like it's that extra level. Gonzo isn't Gonzo in this movie. He is Gonzo the character playing the role of Charles Dickens,
No,
and it's like
I would
that
even
extra
argue that
step.
Gonzo is like the least like his character that he's ever been.
Yeah.
But it's almost like, I mean, I don't know if you guys grew up watching these, but like Wishbone
Yes.
movies and things like that, where he would become the character in these classical tales. And I think this was probably the first time I ever saw A Christmas Carol, and I was like, this is the best story ever. And started my love of Charles Dickens. And then I was just like, I am too young and too dumb to understand Charles Dickens on so many levels. But this was like something that really I connected with, because they took classics or like higher concepts and they modernized it in their own way, but they kept themselves the same. Like I think when we try to digitize the Muppets or anything like that, like we lose that connection.
Yeah.
And that was one of the wonderful things I think about Jason Segel's, is that they kept them as actual Muppets, and they, updated few things. I think you keep the Muppets as practical, but you update the jokes to the current times.
For sure. And I think, but again, even the Jason Segel Muppets, they are trying to go back to the stage show.
Yeah.
And then Disney Plus creates like Muppets Now, where it's like the Muppets YouTube channel, and I'm like, no one asked for this. I don't want the Muppets to have the ability to use the digital age. It was even what kind of hurt. I didn't hate the like Office style show that they tried to do at all.
I didn't hate that either. Yeah.
But I'm like, the charm of what made those Muppet Show episodes work was that what was happening on stage was so inconsequential. The whole show was about the insanity behind the scenes of a theatrical stage show. And it's like, you don't get that when you're doing a YouTube channel. You know what I mean? Like, you need those behind the scenes crazy interactions of like Kermit trying to make sure that Piggy's not like, tied up the guest star in the back room for her to be her love slave, or that like Gonzo's not trying to force them to do some weird dangerous stunt, or that Fozzie's not boring them to death with bad jokes. Like Kermit's trying to keep everything under control and run a show smoothly, and like that is where all of the comedy is born. This movie though works because, again, like there's not a single point where they look at Kermit and say Kermit, right? It's Bob
He's always
Cratchit.
Bob Cratchit. Yeah.
Yeah. They commit to the bit, which is, I mean, like Rizzo and Gonzo are kind of the behind the scenes aspect of it. Like, light the lamp, not the rat, light the lamp. Yeah. Those are like our peek into like the Muppet show type of Muppets, but the story itself just stands on its own.
And I think the importance to it is being so respectful of the text. And I mean, it's interesting that a Muppet interpretation of it is so much more faithful than so many. Yes, they had to add a second Marley, but I mean, apart from that, it just
the dialogue's almost verbatim the book. It's insane.
Yeah. When I read it, I was like, oh, there's only one Marley? Like, that was like my big hang up. I was like, but there's two, and it's a great song.
Right.
We just did an episode of Before My Time with Kelsey Laurie about the original Christmas Carol, and she was blown away that the line that the book ends with Tiny Tim, who did not die. And she's like, I always thought, she's like, I always thought the Muppets just added that. And I'm like, no, that is literally the last line.
I had the same thought, because of course Gonzo would be like, and Tiny Tim, who did not die. I mean, it's for the most part they inhabit the characters, and then the 1 minute where they don't is so funny. When Sam Eagle is the headmaster, and he's just like, it is the American way, and Gonzo has to whisper to him, he's like, the British way. It's just such a funny little moment.
Now talk about a song that I am glad got cut and has not resurfaced is if you have the official soundtrack for the Muppet Christmas Carol, Sam the Eagle sings a very boring song called Chairman of the Board.
Yes. I forgot about that. Yes, he does.
Well, so I guess they spell it B-O-R-E-D.
Oh my God. It is bad. Nice.
I did not know that song. That's interesting. I think Sam Eagle is great for one-liners. I mean,
Sam the Eagle, the hardest I've laughed at Muppets anything actually is Sam the Eagle in Muppets 3D, the Muppet Vision 3D
at Disney.
At Disney, where Kermit asks him if he's ready to go on. He goes, yes, I have a 15-minute musical epic about how great the Americans are. And he goes, you've got 2 minutes. And he just goes, ah! And but like that little gasp is like,
and the fact that special, that performance is called A Tribute to All Countries, but Mostly America. Is, also, I miss Muppet Vision, actually. I don't know if they have it in Florida.
They still have it in Florida, but I am very nervous for how much longer.
Yeah, because they haven't had it in California in quite some time.
Wow.
And,
there's a nice little...
the shop outside is where I get things like the sweatshirt I'm wearing. So I would get a lot of good Muppet stuff over there.
And I'll do this very quick. The saddest thing for me, beyond the death of Jim Henson, I mean, that is devastating in its own right, but that there was supposed to be a whole Muppet world in MGM Studios, and that was the only thing that they had gotten to produce before he passed away. But there was supposed to be something called the Great Muppet Ride, the Great Muppet Movie Ride, and it was going to be scene by scene the Great Movie Ride, but performed by all Muppets instead.
Oh wow!
Like the
Oh,
What a
stuff like
great
that.
ride that would have been.
That would have been
Oh
amazing.
man.
Oh,
Yeah.
my heart.
Well, I think that like I said, the script works because obviously it's a great story. The structure works, and Katie, for this to be the way that you were exposed to Christmas Carol, bless you for that. That means that you didn't see Mr. Magoo, uh, which I think was probably the first time I saw it. Oh, spirits, help me be a better driver. And it's not quite, but
I saw
they
quite
do
a few more afterwards, and I was like,
they do the ghosts in the wrong order in Mr. Magoo. I don't, which I never understood, you know. But yeah, I mean, and look, the Mickey Mouse one, it's like 30 minutes. It's cute. It's like, all
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
I mean, Uncle Scrooge literally was born to play Ebenezer Scrooge in something someday. So,
Yeah.
but
No,
that one, I think it's a little bit more.
It's passable.
Scrooged
Yeah.
is really the only other one I enjoy watching. Like the
Yeah.
Bill Murray Scrooged is like
Yeah.
the best way that it's been ever modernized. Although Spirited this year is a very close.
Thank
I
you.
mean, that's in the top 3 for me right now. That is a
Right.
phenomenal adaptation.
It's fantastic, and I mentioned it on the podcast a couple of weeks ago with you, Christian. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely worth a check out. I will still say that the best Christmas Carol is Muppet Christmas
Yeah,
Carol, though. Like,
and it's the most
Spirited was
faithful.
close.
It truly is the most faithful adaptation that you'll ever get of that story. Something that we have to talk about because
Yeah.
I gave myself the nickname Mr. Muppet, which
I see that.
for a while I was looking to see if I could get that Instagram handle, but someone is just like holding it with no posts, and it makes me so sad.
Oh,
But the true Mr. Muppet, as far as I'm concerned, from the music standpoint, is Jim Henson's greatest co-collaborator, Paul Williams, coming back to
Yeah.
write all the songs for Muppets Christmas Carol, and just yeah,
Crush
I
it.
mean, Paul Williams is one of the greatest songwriters in American history, and having him just sit there and write stuff like Scrooge, like these Here Comes Mr. Humbug, like they're just
Yeah.
so good and catchy.
And the One More Sleep Till Christmas being
Ugh.
like something that people say now. Yeah, we'll talk more about Paul Williams because of his importance with
Emmett Otter, baby.
and look, when Paul and unfortunately when we talk about some of the other Christmas content, when Paul Williams doesn't write the songs and Jerry Jewell doesn't write the scripts, it doesn't quite compare to some of the other stuff. I think that a lot of the classic Muppet stuff, there's always stuff you can take out that's good. You can isolate things. A quote unquote bad episode of the Muppet Show is probably still hysterical for most of it.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes it goes into like a weird performance where you're like, oh, that was 4 minutes that we probably didn't need. But and you're absolutely right. And it was an interesting point. I was reading it. I think it was Entertainment Weekly, even though I know that's not a magazine anymore, but they still exist in some way. It was an interview with Brian Henson where he was talking about how he really wanted to bring Paul Williams back because he just felt like that was going to be, the best way to get the best songs. And he had, he had gone through rehab. It had been a while. And so then the studio, Disney, I guess, was a little nervous. They're like, really? Does he still got it? And oh boy, did that guy still have it, you know? And I think, I mean, the music in this, I don't know about the Sam Eagle song, but all the other songs that are actually in it, including The Love Is Gone. I think that it's so great. It's so catchy. And it's like, finally, now my kids have heard all these songs, so I have an excuse to put them on. You know?
There's when you really dive deep into Muppets, you realize something, especially with the Jim Henson, because I really think that while we've made good and bad Muppet things since, you can't replace the essence of what Jim was for the Muppets. And you look at like who were the frequent co-collaborators with him, you know what I mean? And he kept going back to Paul Williams. He had Paul Williams do Emmett Otter. He had Paul Williams write the songs for the Muppet movie. He had Paul Williams be a guest on the Muppet Show. Like, he was constantly working with Paul Williams. And then the other big person that you connect with Muppets and Christmas, John Denver. He kept going back to the John Denver well because him and John Denver saw eye to eye with like what was he trying to say and do with these things. And thankfully we've gotten away from this, but there was this weird period like post like Muppets in Space, I would say, all the way up until Jason Segel's Muppets, where like the Muppets were like kind of snarky and mean in their
Yeah.
specials, and like
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
and it's like that is never what the Muppets were supposed to be. Like the Muppets, similarly to the Fraggles, similarly to Sesame Street, was like this perfect vision of like a utopian world where everyone loved and cared about each other, and they could still have their arguments, and they could have their squabbles, and they could disagree, and they couldn't see eye to eye on everything. But like at its core, it always came down to a love and appreciation for each other. And this was, for me anyway, the Muppets Christmas Carol was the last time that I really felt that love, like that undeniable love amongst these characters, until the Jason Segel movie, until like you
Really,
had
Muppet Treasure
someone,
Island didn't feel that way for you.
not fully. So I might be slightly biased because someone had said something that like sank into my head last week. Friend of all of us, I'm sure, Geek History Lesson, did an episode on Muppets Christmas Carol last week with William Bibiani. And he pointed out that while he enjoys the Muppets Treasure Island, and now I can't unsee this, the biggest difference between that movie and Muppets Christmas Carol is, again, the casting with Michael Caine. Michael Caine stepped into this movie and was like, I will not act like I am even a little bit a part of the Muppets craziness. And Tim Curry definitely gets a little too sucked into the Muppetness of Curry gets sucked into the Muppetness of his performance, versus like I would love to see Muppets Christmas Carol where you have another actor who is really playing the Long John Silver role as if he is on like the Broadway stage doing the most serious presentation of that character.
I will say, to Tim Curry's, I don't know, credit or downfall, when they actually built a boat for that, and they gave him Dramamine, so he's not quite all there when he's on that boat, because he's on Dramamine and he's very sleepy. I thought he did fantastic.
Probably you could probably tell the same stories about on set at Rocky Horror or the TV version of it.
No,
he's probably always a little sleepy.
No, and those were, I still enjoy it. Muppets from Space is the first one where I'm like, oh no, this is not my Muppets, and then it kind of wasn't my Muppets for a really long time, but I still kept watching every single one of them. I own Muppets Wizard of Oz on DVD, and I have never popped that thing in again, but I bought it.
But you watched it. Yeah, no, look, I get it. And I think you're right. I think that there's good Muppet quality after this, but I would say Muppet Christmas Carol, for me, is the last great moment.
Yes.
And it's really the last holdover from, when Jim was still there. And, I enjoy a lot of it. I see a lot more of it probably because of my kids, than I might otherwise, actual with the Muppet characters, but also other things from Henson, just other properties that, I might not come across. I probably wouldn't know about the new Big Bird if I didn't have kids.
Yeah.
And
you have to also think that there was an element of we're doing this for Jim while making this movie. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And that felt like the most hard. So in all the discussion before doing this podcast, Christian actually came over to my house very sweetly and gave me
something that we'll talk about shortly. Yes.
Yeah. I forgive me if I'm jumping the gun on it.
No, go ahead. It's okay. You can mention what it is. Yeah.
Well, the Muppet Family Christmas, which was I hadn't seen it, but there's so many of the original Muppet movies or specials or things like that feel very familiar in that like maybe I saw it at some point in my life and I just like wasn't consciously aware of it. But like the amount of Muppets that are in that movie is incredible. And Matt, we even got into a discussion about a very specific part where Jim Henson pops up as himself in that movie. And
so at the end of Muppet Christmas Carol, which we'll talk about some of the specifics of the show and why it's so great and why I love it so much, there's a moment at the end where Jim Henson's talking to Sprocket from Fraggle Rock, and he needs somebody to help him do the dishes. But to see him, the first time I rewatched it, I hadn't watched it in a few years. I didn't remember that he was in it, and I was like, I just to see him, and I think every year I don't cry every year, but every year there's always that little twinge in my eye of like, oh yeah, there he is, because I know it's coming, and I see him anyway, and to see this after the fact, because I think this was made I think it first aired in '87, so and so
It's
this
also
is
what he
really
says in that moment.
I was just gonna say, Matt brought up a really great point that like. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
What is it? So, well, go ahead. Yeah, Matt.
Well, he says they look happy. I like it when they're happy.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, it's like, does that,
I agree.
does that not like capture, but that to me is like,
that's the heart of that.
That's the heart of all of the Muppet stuff that made it work, is that he like really saw these characters as creatures that need it to be happy and joyful and like, and overcome all the odds. And I do think that after this movie, you really don't see Frank Oz coming back out to do Muppet stuff. Like, I really think that Muppets Christmas Carol was this. We're doing this for Jim. We're doing this for our friend. And credit where credit's due, because he gets so forgotten in Muppet lore. Also for Richard Hunt, who died before Muppets Christmas Carol, who was a huge part of the first openly gay Muppeteer. Like, was this huge person who also died shortly after Jim. And like, it was this reunion of the remaining three and some of the new up and comers and some of the Sesame Street people, like getting them all back together. But I think it was like, we could do a memorial service. We could do all these things for our friend. And we can, as someone who's very much in the thick of grieving and missing a friend that was so important, like that dictates so much of your life decisions. When you lose someone that's of that level in your life, even this, we're doing this a couple days after Geekscape did the 24-hour charity live stream, and I had to play a video of my friend singing, because I was like, she should be here. It's her birthday. She should be part of this, and she's not. And everything I do is because when I was in high school, she believed in me. You know what I mean? And here's these people. Frank Oz was like 17 when Jim Henson found him and was like, you are the most, he literally told him, you are more talented than me. The second you turn 18, you need to contact me and I will take you under my wing. Like, how do you not come back and do something in tribute to this person that believed in you so much?
One time when I was back in New York, they had a Henson exhibit at the Museum of the Moving Image in Astoria, and there was a lot of great stuff, like actual, artifacts, models, just all this stuff. But there was also, they were showing, how it was behind the scenes on Sesame Street, and it's just the two of them. So you can see the underneath where they are with the characters up above them, and just watching the two of them interact and making each other laugh. And by the way, in very PG terms, you know what I mean? It's not like your bloopers that need to be bleeped out, but it's just so funny watching them together. And anytime you see them, I mean, there's the
Muppet movie outtakes too. I'm not sure if you ever saw that, where they're just in the farm. They're on a farm goofing around. Like
the outtakes for Emmett Otter. He was the Muppeteer for Ma, and did basically like a scratch vocal of while they were doing the show. And so there's outtakes of him when things go awry, and it's so funny. Yeah, I think Frank Oz is an important part. I want to move on from Muppet Christmas Carol, but only for the interest of time, not because I want to stop talking about it. But is there anything, Katie or Matt, that you want to make sure we get to before we talk about Muppet Family Christmas?
The only thing I want to say isn't about Muppet Christmas Carol, but it's something I want to throw out there very quickly before we get into Muppet Family Christmas, is that this year I watched Christmas Eve on Sesame Street for the first time, which is not as much of a Henson production as the rest, but is nonetheless also heartwarming, charming in a very like way that a 1978 Christmas special can only be. Right. And I don't think we'll get into John Denver and the Muppets Christmas together, but
we'll
also
talk a little
magical.
bit about it. But I saw you post about Christmas Eve on Sesame Street. So I mentioned that to Katie, and
I watched that last night. Yeah,
we did each watch it. And here's what I'll say about it. As soon as they get past the ice skating, it's great.
It's brilliant.
The ice skating in the beginning, it's like it's got all the things about Sesame Street in the early years. Like I don't know how many times I've shown my kids the video of the little girl with Kermit who he wants to count. And instead of saying numbers, she says Cookie Monster.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
she kisses him at the end. So
Yes.
those like videos with kids is such like the best part, the most timeless part of Sesame Street. So the fact that those were in this Christmas special, being like, yeah, how does Santa get down the chimney? And I had watched that yesterday afternoon. And then my son starts talking about how does Santa Claus get down the chimney? I'm like, what? You weren't home when I was watching that. So it's like, it's such a timeless, simple question. I love that Mr. Hooper's still in it.
Yeah. And they say Happy Hanukkah to him. I was so happy
and
about
just to take that little moment to say Happy Hanukkah to him. I think that, the ice skating stuff is kind of unforgivable, but
I have fun. You know what? It's worth it all just for the human legs popping out of a trash can awkwardly.
I did like that. Yeah.
For Ernie. Yeah.
So Muppet Family Christmas, I remembered it. I had it on VHS. I recorded a bunch of Christmas specials, probably my second year of college. And I kind of forgot about it. I had a VHS. I recorded it off of Nickelodeon because they were rerunning a lot of the stuff at that time. And I had seen it when it aired initially, but I hadn't seen it in years. And I watched it again. I'm like, this is so great. And then again, sort of I move and I don't see it for a while. And just every time I revisit it, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. And Katie, how you didn't know about this? How did I describe this to you? What did I say it was?
It was the best description I've ever heard of anything. You said it was the Avengers Endgame of the Muppets universe, and it was. Yeah. Like
because they open up, Doctor Strange opens up the portal, and oh my God, this is a Fraggle hole? And then it's oh, look, it's the Sesame Street gang caroling. And I remember, look, I grew up reading lots of comic books. I love a crossover more than anybody. So much so I even like the Magnum PI Murder She Wrote crossover. That's how much I like crossovers. And I was just like, I can't believe they're all here.
Well, and it was one of those things you told me, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm sure we'll see like Fozzie and Gonzo. Like I'm like, oh yeah, it's just all the Muppets. The Muppets are already kind of their own universe. But then when Sesame Street came in and Fraggle Rock, and I completely like Fraggle Rock and Sesame Street were like two different properties in my mind. And so seeing them all together, I was like, oh yeah, no duh. They're Henson products, but also like they have the same heart. Like I loved Fraggle Rock. That was such a great show that like no one seemed to know in my generation.
Yeah, no, I remember when that premiered on HBO. My brother and I would watch that every week. I loved Fraggle Rock. And probably my favorite, just in terms of performance wise, my favorite moment in the whole special is when Doc is turning to Ernie and Bert and they're just saying, this starts, that starts with A. And then he's like, what is this?
What are we doing?
And he says, this passes for small talk where we live. and I was just like,
such a good joke.
Yeah, there's so many good jokes in it. And the best Muppet stuff is just filled with jokes and jokes that maybe kids don't get, but then they slip on the Icy Patch. My son loves the Icy Patch every year because we watch this every year. We watch Emmett Otter every year. All these specials.
It's cold enough to freeze your Winnebago. Like there's so many runners in that special.
And is this movie just Barbra Streisand the entire time? Like with like Vaseline over the like lens?
My favorite thing in that whole special, besides I agree, the small talk line is such a brilliant line. Is whoever it is doing the voice of the camera guy taking photos of Miss Piggy, and he's just like, yes, more. Ooh, do the little pouty face. Do the pouty face.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
So ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. And she comes in, and I swear this is a Barbra Streisand outfit, like with the white like wrap and like and she's on like a carriage, and of course Kermit's like, she likes to make an entrance.
And Doc is just like, and she had this costume for me, so she's just like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for no reason, and it's great because it is. There's so many of the characters. I love Fozzie's mom just in general,
who got like tickets to go to like Aruba from I think Fozzie, and then was like,
she was going to Malibu she'd been taking surfing lessons. So she just the beginning, the joke about like, oh no, my mom loves surprises, and Gonzo's like, I hope so, because she's in for a doozy. And the reason I love this special so much is, one, because it's so great. It's heartbreaking that more people don't see it. They put out a VHS version of it, and it's like a half an hour. They took out most of the songs. The music rights are the biggest problem with this in terms of people being able to see it.
Well,
And
I think
Go
all
ahead.
3 properties are owned by different copyright holders too.
Oh,
Well,
boy.
now, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's also hurt it. Because someone texted me and was like, "Why can't I find this streaming anywhere?" And I'm like, I don't think HBO Max, Disney Plus, and Paramount Plus can come to an agreement on who would have it.
What's
Right,
beautiful is
and-
that you
and
can
it-
watch it on YouTube.
Yes,
You
it is
can
on
go-
YouTube.
yes.
The
To
wild
watch it
west of streaming sites.
To watch it officially is a different thing entirely. I found Christmas Eve on Sesame Street on YouTube. It wasn't a problem, and John Denver was there as well. But yeah, and this and sort of the version of Emmett Otter that I fell in love with both kind of disappeared for a little while as soon as Disney basically took over the main Muppet characters. Like once they had Kermit, they reverted to an earlier version of Muppet of Emmett Otter that didn't have him in it. And yeah, the song. So even before that, though, they didn't get the music rights for home video, and some of the songs I think were too expensive. And it was like whatever the Muppet Babies sing, they didn't. It was Santa Claus is Coming to Town, right?
Yeah.
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 When they popped up, I was like, "Oh, this is Muppet Babies before Muppet Babies was a thing."
Well,
because they were in
Muppets
Muppets
Take
Take Manhattan.
But this is like the 78, 70.
Well, no, Muppets.
Oh, this was 87 when this wasn't.
So that was 87. I
Okay.
think the TV series was on by then. But
Yeah,
the first time we ever
so
see
it
the
was-
Muppet Baby.
There's a segment of the Muppet Babies and Muppets Take Manhattan that tested so well they made the cartoon based off of it.
Right.
And then for this special, that's kind of like the fourth entity of the Muppets universe that they've squeezed in to get the Henson trifecta by the end.
And by the way, I'm glad they didn't try to horrify children by trying to get the Dark Crystal in here as well.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
I mean,
David Bowie just shows up.
that'd be amazing.
He's in a Fraggle hole for some reason. I believe.
It's like, what is he doing here?
I would believe that the labyrinth was part of a Fraggle world.
Yeah. In these, like, I don't know, I think it's running times on network television were longer back then. It's like 45 to 50 minutes, whatever it is. They pack so much in there. There's so many great jokes, so many interactions. You're watching, you're just like watching people get along. I think who is it? Animal and Cookie Monster, is like my kind of fella, I was just like, it's like, this is everything you wanted, this is what I wanted from the Flintstones Meet the Jetsons, but I didn't really quite get that.
There's a song that shows up in Muppet Family Christmas, which they do this giant, beautiful 10-minute carol sing.
The carol sing.
Well, they're just singing carol after carol after carol, but they end with this song Together for Christmas. They're like old friends, new friends here,
which is from
and they put the lyrics up too,
from the Christmas Toy.
I was going to say from the Christmas Toy, which, if you're not familiar with the Christmas Toy, probably could have gotten some money from Pixar's Toy Story, because boy, does that plot feel
Matt,
weirdly
I'm
familiar
going to tell
now.
you that I honestly believe that the Christmas Toy is why Disney bought the Muppets, because they realized that, like, they basically, Toy Story basically took that, it's toys that come to life. And
it's toys that come to life, and the kid's favorite toy is afraid he's going to be replaced by the new space toy that the kid gets for Christmas.
Interesting.
and look, I think that in a lot of ways, obviously, I would say that Toy Story is better put together.
It's an improved story for sure.
But I loved that story when I was a kid. My sister had that on. There was a VHS that it was 6 hours of like that, and like, I don't know, Gem and the Hologram. So year round, we were watching the Christmas Story, and there's great songs. And that song, that Old Friend, New Friend, what is the song called?
It's called Together for Christmas. Is the official name.
It's a great song, and there's a new song in the John Denver special, which they also do as part of the Carol Sing, right?
It's in every one of us. Yes, it's in every one.
So I had forgotten that until I rewatched John Denver, and that segment with the Carol Sing, it's like. It's like a Where's Waldo, because it's like, I have an old VHS, so it's hard to freeze frame and really look, but you see so many characters there. Emmett Emmett Otter is sitting there with everybody.
Yeah.
You
I
see
didn't
him
notice
there
that.
with everyone. And I was just like, man, they just got everybody in there. It's like that. There's that great scene at the end of the original Muppet movie where they have all the characters and they pull
It's
out. This is like
almost
that. Yeah.
it's almost to the point that it feels like, obviously he didn't, but it almost feels like Jim Henson knew he was leaving this world soon and
And wanted
wanted
to
an
leave as
excuse to
many.
bring everything together, because
Yeah.
this is like one of the last like Henson directed specials that they really did with all the Muppets beforehand. I know that it's
I
like a
don't know if
3-year
there
gap, but
was there one after this. I
I
don't.
don't
I mean,
think there
he only
was.
passed away like 3 years later.
Yeah, I
It
think he
wasn't
started
long
doing like the
after.
Jim Henson Hour, which was like almost like a docu-series, and he worked on like the Storyteller. But I think the Muppets were essentially kind of in a holding period while he worked out the Disney contracts.
Yeah.
So it is like his final goodbye in a lot of ways.
I wish people could see this more easily, but I'm so glad that YouTube. I mean, I
Yeah.
checked before we did this. It's there, the whole thing. You
Yeah.
can find it. You can find it with commercials, which is
Which is
actually how
great.
I have it. I have it
Yeah.
with commercials. The version I gave to Katie is the one that I recorded off of Nickelodeon, and I digitized it before my VHS disintegrated, basically.
Yeah.
But then later, a friend who knew how much I liked it got me a DVD that was the original primetime airing of it. So I have like all the 1987 Christmas commercials. Next week, Perfect Strangers will be back. All of that stuff.
Yep.
So, and I'm thinking that this is the year I'm going to watch it that way with my kids to see what they think of
Dude.
35-year-old TV commercials.
Those commercials are just, they're so chef's kiss of like exactly the type, like any like toy or like any way that they like product placed or like what they considered healthy at the time. Just beautiful. It's so fun.
Yeah.
I will say the one on YouTube ends with like something about it, like a murder of a baby or something like that. Like
Oh, good.
a news report.
Yeah.
So
Good stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Fighting the Frizzies at 8.
Which well, you know what? I know, Katie, you have to go momentarily. So I know as part of your homework, you also watched John Denver and the Muppets, and you and I spoke a little bit before Matt was here. I want to give you, because you did the homework, I want to give you a moment to share your thoughts. What stood out for you? Let's start with what you were impressed by. What did you like the most about John Denver and the Muppets?
It was, again, it was that original Muppet feel. Like we also we open up on John Denver, but one of the scenes that we open up with the Muppets actually is like a writer's room, and there's that exactly what you were talking about earlier, Matt, of that like behind the scenes craziness. And I think that, like, again, all of these things that you guys sent me, I was just like, something is so vaguely familiar about all of these things. Like maybe I saw a rerun or something, I'm not sure. But I was like, this feels so familiar. I was like, this is the image I always had when talking about writers' rooms or like working in writers' rooms. It's just like the paper, like planes flying over and like all the joke pitches and like the different things.
I honestly believe that Tina Fey used this writer's room as how she was going to depict the 30 Rock writers' room.
Yeah.
I mean, most writers' rooms that I've ever been around, mostly just as an intern, like bringing in lunch. But
it's pretty similar.
It really feels like that. I do love the the let's put on a show, old timey showbiz. I'll let you finish your thoughts, but for me, what stands out more than anything, Matt, you kind of referenced it. Not everybody who was on as a guest of the Muppet Show interacted with them in a way that was 100% believable. John Denver talks to them and reacts to them in a way where you really feel the connection.
The scene where he talks to Kermit is heartbreaking. And I really, truly think that Jim Henson was being honest about how he feels about not being around his family most of the year because of showbiz through Kermit in that scene. Like, it is a heartbreakingly beautiful scene.
It's a heartbreaking scene that is, of course, in true Muppet fashion, filled with little puns and singers. What else, Katie? Before you run off,
a couple of things. When John Denver goes into that green screen, I was just like, "Ooh, yes, give me those 70s graphics." That was fantastic. And then that transition into what I could have sworn was just the base set for a Muppet Christmas Carol, the interior town. Like, I swear that's the same exact location that they probably shot Muppet Christmas Carol, but I'm probably wrong about that. Also, I was concerned that Miss Piggy was a geisha at a certain point when Miss Piggy finally got her
Oh,
number.
yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
oh no, what are we
When
doing?
she comes out as Fifi, yeah.
Yeah. And the Muppet nativities, like it got like so Christian-y at the end.
Honestly, I think that's the main reason why you don't really come across this anymore. I think you can buy it officially, like on Amazon or on YouTube. I think you can pay for it, which of course, only a sucker would do that. But I think it is really Jesus-y towards the end, and I
it
think
is Jesus-y at the end, but I have to applaud it. They made sure that there was every single race and creed of child
Yeah.
depicted
Oh,
in that group
100%.
of children.
Yeah.
Like the equality for 1978 on a primetime TV special, like hook it up to my veins. Like I love it so much.
Yeah, it was so 70s, and I was just like, oh yeah. But I would have to say, like, the Sesame Street one was definitely my favorite of the two homework assignments. Because again,
Muppet Family Christmas wasn't a homework assignment; it was a gift. I
it was a
brought it to you.
gift.
I presented it to you. Like, your Christmas will be better for this.
And let me just like preface, like, I told Christian this is my favorite homework assignments is watching the Muppets and like things I haven't seen or feel like I had, like, because there's just so much familiarity with just all of the cast and all the voice and everything. Even that creepy John Denver nativity scene with the Muppets, I was like, there's something so familiar about this, and I don't know what it is.
I would assume you've seen it. It's been on, just maybe it was on cable or whatever. I think the thing about John Denver, what's it called? John Denver with the Muppets?
John Denver and the Muppets: A Christmas Together.
Yeah.
And it was made as a special to promote an album that they had recorded. They made the Christmas album first and then made the special to promote the album,
which is usually the way to do it. I think that's usually how it works. Katie, I know you need to go, so I want to make sure that you got in your thoughts on that. And have you ever seen the Muppets celebrate Jim Henson for after he died?
I've seen pieces of it. I haven't sat down and watched the whole thing because there's only so much crying I can do.
I was going to say we should do a live stream with all the tears included.
Oh my God!
Not just for you, by the way. I've seen it and I'll still cry.
I'll cry uncontrollably. I want to throw one thing out with John Denver before Katie leaves, because it's actually, I think it was the exact moment when I was like, Katie should also watch this. the arguably one of the hardest laughs I've had at any Muppets Christmas special is the very beginning of that, where they have the runner that Fozzie keeps missing his cue on the 12 Days of Christmas. But the one that gets me the most is when it gets to his part and he just looks at John Denver and goes, "What?"
That was also really familiar, especially like how Miss Piggy does 5 golden rings. Like that's how we would always do it when we sang.
I'm pretty sure this is where the bumps first were introduced into the song 12 Days of Christmas.
Right. And that, again, that is my favorite part is that song at the beginning. Katie, people want to keep in touch with you. It's El Sassy Pants with an S, except for on TikTok. It's with a Z.
With a Z.
All right.
I'll post more things later, but thank you guys so much for having me on. I'll see you later.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you soon. So the thing about when it comes to John Denver is it feels very much like a 70s Christmas special. And in some ways that's great. And then in some ways it reminds you how the Star Wars holiday special happened, which I believe was the same year, 78. Yeah. And it's just like you kind of overthink maybe some of it. Like the wooden soldiers segment, I was just like, ooh, the pacing and some of this stuff. And it's not even that it's bad, but it's just like, you're trying to entertain children, aren't you?
Yeah. Henson's always weird though, because I feel like with the Muppets, Henson did want to push away a little bit from the, like, you are a kids entertainer of Sesame Street and try to make stuff that appealed to, in his mind, just appealed to families. So stuff that was there for the kids and stuff that was there for the parents. So while I do agree that like the soldiers and the ballet of it all, like, as a kid, I would have been bored to tears watching. But as an adult, I'm like, this is really well done.
It's incredibly well done.
And that's the
John
difference between
Denver's
that and the holiday
performance.
special, is I don't watch the Star Wars holiday special and go, "This is really well done."
No, but what I always say about the Star Wars holiday special, it is a testament to what an incredible actor Harrison Ford is,
Yes.
because no matter what's around him, you look at him and you go like, "Yep, that's Han Solo."
Yep.
None of this other shit makes any sense.
No.
But he's still Han Solo in that fucking special.
So,
But yeah,
I had heard
that's a great comparison. Yeah. What were you gonna say?
I had heard when they were doing the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special, I kept hearing that James Gunn was trying to make it a slight homage to the Star Wars holiday special during production. And what I really truly wanted was for us to literally do the Star Wars holiday special, but with like Groot's family instead of Chewbacca's family, where it's
Going home for
just a
Life
bunch
Day.
of tree people saying Groot over and over again for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's why he included the music in that. That was actually the last time that I did a show with Katie. We talked about
Yeah.
the Guardians holiday special and just how much I loved it. And when I put the panel together for that, I had to check with one of my regular Marvel contributors, Michael Shirley, who, I had to make sure he liked it, because he kind of doesn't like anything. So if he didn't like it, I was like, he's not allowed on that panel. I can't have him.
No,
dragging me
sometimes you
down.
have to set those rules, because like
Yeah.
is it this perfect thing? No. It's
No.
brought me joy, and that's all that matters.
That's all I want. Yeah. And I think that
And that's
and
me with
look,
Emmett Otter, honestly. If we want
Yeah.
to jump into Emmett a little bit, is like Emmett Otter is not the tightest story that's ever been told. There is a lot of tell not show in that special, but the music and just like, again, it's the love that these characters have in this world that feels very lived in is like what makes it work. And I don't care that it's essentially the gift of the Magi. I don't care that there's a million ways they could have told us about the talent show beyond a character just saying, "Hey, did you hear about the talent show?"
Yeah, I know.
Like there are flaws in the scripting, but it's still charming and beautiful.
No, exactly. And that's testament to the Muppet performers who were involved, but of course the music from Paul Williams. I love like capital LOVE, all the letters, so many of the songs in Emmett Otter. Emmett Otter really
clearly when
is
the river meets the sea just meant so much to Jim, because he kept finding ways to put it in other stuff.
I know. And I read the book to my son every Christmas. We do it over a couple nights. And it's just like, to take this story of like, oh yeah, we sure are poor and we don't have anything for Christmas and everything's terrible, but we've got each other, is really like, it's so sweet. But Ma is so funny in the original version before they kind of made her a little bit nicer. She's like, well, I've got the bill right here if you want to just fall off the dock. And then I think they took out some of that stuff so they didn't make her seem mean. But I was just like, I was just like, look, my mom will appreciate that I'm saying this. It reminded me of my mom, who never took anything from anybody. And it was on, as a kid, it was on HBO I'm not exaggerating, every day in December. You would look in the cable guide and it would say Emmett Otter Jugman Christmas, and it had the dates next to it. It was on every day. And there were probably Christmases where I watched it 10 times entirely. And this is before we had a VCR, before most people I knew. This is even before that. And it was
new to me. I grew up on Muppets Family Christmas. That was my first Muppets Christmas experience.
Right. Okay.
Then I saw Muppets Christmas Carol in theaters. And for the first 30 years of my life, it was, well, I mean, whatever. As long as they've existed, those were the only two for a really, really long time. Love it. Yeah. Like, but then someone bought me Emmett Otter on DVD and I watched that for the first time. And then one of my podcasts, someone wanted to do the John Denver special. So we watched that. And like I would say every 2 years, a new Muppets thing is added into my Christmas rotation. So now the Christmas Eve on Sesame Street is going to be part of that rotation. And I think I've gotten all of the main ones now. Like I'm sure the A Very Merry Muppet Christmas is fine, but I don't think it would be like a yearly rotation for me. And same with Letters.
I will tell you that Letters to Santa is not in my rotation.
Yeah. And I'm told to avoid the Lady Gaga Muppets Christmas special at all costs.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah. That was like the bat signal went off and it was like, don't look at this. But I'm going to, I think, skim through the Christmas Eve on Sesame Street with my son because he just loves Cookie Monster. he kept going back to an episode from like, I don't know, season 2 of Sesame Street that he would want to watch on HBO Max, because there's a runner through it where Cookie Monster borrows Ernie's phone and he keeps talking to his mom for a long time. And in the 5th one, he finally just eats the phone. And I'm like, oh my God, this is everything that he loves about Cookie Monster. He eats the pencil and the typewriter and the phone, and Santa answers. I'm just like, oh my gosh. And Emmett Otter, I watch with them. I think, his sister's 5 now. I think she'll be able to sit still a little bit longer. I think she'll have more questions about the story, but he just knows we watch it every year. And, it's when I say like, oh, you know what we need to watch, he'll usually say Emmett Otter. So usually I pick something else, something shorter first. We watch the Opus and Bill Christmas special, the Bloom County special, because of how much I always love that. And he still thinks it's funny every year. It's like, nice. Berkeley Breathed hates the way it turned out, but I love it so much. It's so funny. So, I have like all these, which at one point they were all these like hard to find Christmas specials, which are like, these are the ones that I have to watch every year. And just to circle back to John Denver for a moment, it's so great. Again, his interaction with them. And I loved especially the first, but the Oh God movies with him and George Burns.
Okay,
my mom really liked those, and so those were always on in my house. My mom had 2 8-tracks. She had Barry Manilow and John Denver, so there was a lot of John Denver in my life as a kid. So it always brings back fond memories, and I loved watching him interact with the Muppets. And you kind of, it's a little different than with Jim Henson, but there's also the moment of like, oh my gosh, yeah, he died way too soon.
Yeah. I mean, and I would say in the same category as Jim is like, by all accounts, just seemed like a genuinely good guy who cared about people.
Yeah. I mean, Miss Piggy's literally throwing herself at him. He's like, well, I'm a married man. And it's almost like, like, come on, Piggy, what do you think's going to happen here?
Dude, the slow motion run is still so good to me. But no, this is definitely part of like my Christmas tradition is like watching these Muppet things. I do want to give a shout out just to the year 1987. I have a VHS tape that my aunt recorded for me when I was 2 years old, I guess, almost 3 years old. That I still have. I still have the VHS tape, and she taped all the Christmas specials that aired in 1987. So I've got this tape that has the Pee-wee's Christmas special, the Garfield Christmas special, the Claymation Christmas special, and the Muppets Family Christmas. And it's like, those are 4 heavy hitter, top tier Christmas specials in my eyes. Like those are masterpieces.
My VHS is actually from 1995 from Nickelodeon is how Muppet Family Christmas got on there. But it's also got like, the Rudolph and the Frosty. Cause like I wanted to have those when I was at college, just because I was like, I think I need to actually watch those. Dominica Saxon has a great comment. My daughter wore out the Emmett Otter's VHS tape. She watched it so many times over and over.
Love that.
I digitized my VHS version of that too, because they cut so much out of it, because for a long time Kermit was cut out of it. And that was the original airing didn't have Kermit in it. So they reverted to that. And now I believe Kermit, I got the Blu-ray last year. And it has Kermit on the front, and they make it clear. So it's just like, I don't know. I love his storytelling, him interacting with the River Bottom Nightmare Band. Them
I've never seen that version, so I have to get around. I've only had the Kermit free DVD.
And there's Kermit at the end. He's a narrator. So Kermit at the end of the story, he has the most amazing outfit on. I've posted it on social media in the past. It's like Kermit stops by the set of Playboy After Dark. Like what he's wearing in it. I'll have to send it to you. I don't want to take the time to grab it right now. But yeah, that version was always the one that was most important to me. The story is great. It doesn't take away from the story. It doesn't take away from the great music in it. But yeah, it's these were the things that were most important to me. Yeah, we would watch Frosty. We would watch Rudolph. But I mean, these are the ones. And it's funny you mentioned Garfield, because Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, we always watch the DVD of the 3 Garfield specials that I've had for like 20 years.
And talk about very briefly before I do also have to roll out.
Yeah, no, I wanted to let you know. Yeah.
But I mean, for all the things that make me cry in all of these different Muppets Christmas specials, I mean, the Garfield Christmas special still holds holds the golden standard of that grandmother's speech is the absolute saddest thing that has ever appeared in a Christmas special.
And the common moment in each 3 of those specials I referenced, when Garfield looks at the camera and says, "Nice touch."
Yeah.
You know, there's just these little things. I know, yeah, the grandma character, and when she comes back for Thanksgiving, when she sits down to play the piano and she kicks Doc Boy off to the side, that's my son every year, like Christmas special watching. That moment is what he always looks forward to. Is step aside, Sonny boy. It's little grandma's turn. Anyway, Matt, we could talk about all this stuff, and you know what? I think we'll have more to talk about next Christmas. Take a quick moment. You talked about Weird Algorithm, but I want to make sure you let people know about One Hit Thunder, another great show that I know you do for Geekscape.
Well, thank you. So I actually do quite a few shows for Geekscape, but One Hit Thunder is the big one right now. We every week talk about different one-hit wonders with different comedians and musicians, and sometimes just me and my co-host Chris Falios of the band Punchline, who I'm wearing the shirt of. But honestly, the other one I really want to talk about, because we're having our best season ever. Christmas 365. I do an all year round Christmas podcast with my buddy Dylan, and people have definitely discovered the podcast this Christmas season. It's been absolutely magical. Tune in. There's over 110 episodes at this point, and our joke is that we're going to go until we make exactly 365 episodes of it, and then we'll stop. and people can just listen to an episode a day for a full year, and we'll be done with it. But we're having too much fun. I think we're just going to keep going.
Have you gotten to the point with that show where you've gotten to some really bad ones, or do you try to stick to the good ones right now?
So there are certain things that we won't cover. Neither him nor I have any love for the Jim Carrey Grinch movie, so we're just like, we're not going to cover that. Like, who are we to like trash? We don't want to trash anything that someone else might have a ton of nostalgia for. So we really try to lean towards like bouncing back and forth and like listening to Christmas albums that we love, or watching Christmas specials that we love, or movies. And we try to make it seasonal. So we'll do like the Christmas horror movies in October. In February, we usually do like Christmas rom-coms. Summertime, we get real loose with what is constituted as a Christmas property, because we don't want to be thinking about snow. So that's when it's like, oh, the Real Big Fish Christmas ska EP, like stuff that gives us like summer vibes and Christmas vibes. We try to make sure that everything feels like it fits that particular month's vibe.
Rudolph and Frosty Christmas in July. Come on.
There you go. Exactly. Maybe we'll
Which is not good, by the way.
No, it probably wouldn't be. Every once in a while we have fun, but
yeah.
but right now we're almost done with the holidays, so we haven't talked about anything new on the show. We try to make sure November, December is all nostalgia all the time. Yeah. January will be us talking about Spirited and the Santa Claus TV series on Disney Plus, and pretty much every new Christmas property that dropped this year.
Final question before I let you go. Have you seen Violent Night?
Not yet, and I think we're going to hold that off until October. That feels like it would be a better October watch.
I will tell you that it delivered everything that I wanted from the trailer, and then there was so much heart to it that I wasn't expecting. I'm like, am I getting emotional on this movie?
I'm ready. And
I did.
It looks great. Yeah.
It is. I love David Harbour. I there's times where I feel like I can take or leave Stranger Things, but when I see him in other things, I'm always like, oh, he's so great. He's a perfect Santa. In any case, I'm going to let you go, but if people want to keep in touch with you on social media, how do they do that?
I am at Saint Mort literally everywhere. So that's spelled out SAINT MORT. It was a nickname I got in high school that is still stuck with me for 20 years. So stay tuned for all of everything that I do. I produce podcasts full time, so a lot of self-promotion up in there.
Well, thanks again, Matt, and I look forward to talking Christmas with you, and who knows what else in the near future. But I will let you get back to your real life, and I'll stay here and wind things down in Christmas Town. Thanks again, Matt Kelly. There's some comments in the chat I wanted to get to. Dominica Saxon still hasn't seen the Star Wars Christmas special. We are going to do something with that. I think that we kind of ran out of time this year. Maybe next year we'll do it on Twitch. and we'll watch it live. There are a few people that haven't seen it. Dominica Saxon also met reference. I remember that Magnum PI episode with Murder She Wrote. He questioned if she was the one killing everyone. She had his show taken off the air harsh. And yeah, well, some of these comments are from kind of a while ago from what we were talking about. But yeah, and the ice skating in the Christmas Eve on Sesame Street was a lot. Let's put it that way. But there was a fun interaction that I saw. Let's see, it was when Ghost showed up. Yeah. So he's talking. Ghost 8386 references Muppet Christmas Carol came out before my 9th birthday, and Dominica Saxon with a quick retort: I'd been married and divorced by the time this came out in 1992. But it's kind of the beauty of the Muppets. It's kind of timeless. If you're my age and you grew up in the 70s and into the 80s, I mean, I would get to stay up late for an extra 30 minutes on the night that the Muppet Show was on. I would go to bed at 8:30 and I get to watch the Muppet Show. And it was a really big deal. This is before they started rerunning it like 5 days a week. So the Muppets were always an important part of my life. They were always an important part of Christmas because of Emmett Otter, really. And happy birthday to Ghost 8386 as well. And I see that Craig was there. This is sort of like the end of Romper Room. If you're really old, you remember that, where you look through the magic mirror and see everybody that was there in the chat. But I love how many of you stuck around for this conversation. I love talking about Christmas shows, and the Muppets are responsible for, I would say, some of the best that I'm familiar with. If you haven't seen any of the shows we're talking about, you can find them through less than legal methods, mostly YouTube. You can find Muppet Family Christmas, which I strongly recommend. Make sure you get the full version of it. And the Christmas Eve on Sesame Street, I watched for the first time last night. I don't even remember seeing that as a kid. Jim Henson with the Muppets. John Denver with the Muppets. I remember some of the isolated things from it, but I hadn't seen it in years. So you can find all this stuff. Some of it you can pay for. So if you want to respect the fact that creators need to earn a living as well, you could go ahead and do that. In any case, I am ecstatic. I'm full of holiday cheer and glad to have gotten to share it with so many of you in the chat. And we are looking to have our big Bladtcast Christmas special one day next week. We don't have a date for you yet, but please follow me on social media at ChristianDMZ. I'll be sure to let you know as soon as I can when you'll be able to join us live for that. We'll see how much of the gang we can get together for some holiday cheer. As always, please subscribe to the Bladtcast on YouTube. You will get all of our new videos. You'll get the shows we do, all the interviews I do. I've been doing a lot of these musician interviews, and I'm doing so many, I'm having trouble catching up, putting them on the podcast. We'll get a few of those in for the end of the year, so keep your ears open for that for our audio-only listeners. And follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. That is all the time we have for now, but we will see you next time on the Bladtcast.